So while this is all fresh in my mind and I've just been researching it a bunch the last couple of days, I wanted to explain why you would put all of these crazy angles into the front end of a car, an RC car, a real car, doesn't matter. And you can see on this one the upper control arms are behind the lower control arms, and then they're set at crazy angles to the body. Where the pivot point is set to the front of the wheel, and it's aimed off at an angle down. Anyways, all this stuff. Why does a front end look like this? So I thought 2 minutes. Let's go over the real basics of setting up a car. So firstly, we have tow. If you set up a car dead ahead, all the wheels dead ahead, or towed in on the front, towed out on the rear. Now imagine this car hitting some little pebble, something like that, that just drags this wheel back, and the car starts to shift off to the left a little bit. As the weight transfers onto this inside wheel, that's going to make it shift to the left even harder. Meanwhile, the rear wheel being towed out here is actually going to pull the rear end out of line. So what you're going to get is the front end trying to go that way as it shifts to that outside wheel, and the rear end trying to go that way. It's really good if you want to make really sharp turns, but in reality, you're just going to spin out all the time with this setup. Cars that are set up like this are really nervous and almost impossible to drive. That's why we set up RC cars mostly in this X configuration. If we imagine the same thing, left-hand turn, intentional or not, what happens is as the weight transfers to this outside wheel, this actually settles it down. It wants to go in the direction of the wheel, which is out that way. It also, the rear end, wants to actually pull itself in towards the center of the car a little bit. And so that will actually square up the rear end and shift it back into line, while this is swinging the car back and putting the weight, and then it kind of settles between the two. And so what you end up is a car that's balanced. That's tow. This is how you want to set up an RC car. Next is camber. Camber is really important. If you did no camber, what would happen is as you roll into a corner, your contact patch, the point where the ground contacts the tire, becomes really small. When you put a bunch of camber into a front end, your contact patch gets a lot wider. So a car that may look a little silly because the wheels are hanging in like that, as it rolls into a corner and you get body roll and the suspension rolls, the tire actually flattens out and you get a better contact patch through the tire. The downside of this is that you'll lose some grip in the straight line. So a lot of times the camber will be different on the front end versus the rear end, and it depends, four-wheel drive, two-wheel drive, whatever. But the basics are, the more camber, the harder into the corner the car is going to start to really bite and hook up. Lastly, the most confusing one, which is caster. This kind of caster, if we imagine this is the side of the wheel, and this is the pivot point of the front wheel. So that is what it's turning around. If we draw a line through the pivot point, we can see that it's coming out here behind the contact patch. Imagine trying to ride a bike, if the bike is back here, that has a wheel that's like this. This is going to be almost impossible to drive. This would be neutral, and so dead ahead, that's going to also be really nervous. What you need is this leaned back caster, and the reason is that puts the pivot point out in front of the contact patch, so the wheel naturally wants to fall in line with the suspension. Whereas this wants to do the exact opposite. The wheel wants to flip around and put the pivot point in front of the contact patch. So this wants to always try and become this. So you always want positive caster. That's why RC cars always have the front ends kicked up a little bit. It's for other reasons too, but this is the basics of how you set up the caster. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll keep trying to do some little technical stuff, but I just thought while it was fresh in my mind, that's camber, caster, and tow, and the basics of why you'd set up a car a certain way. So, alright, thanks for watching.